Hello again and Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you for joining us for Dragon Trail's first webinar of 2020, which we're presenting together today with Create Consulting. Today we'll be reviewing the top Chinese tourism and digital trends of 2019 and looking forward to what the tourism industry should be ready for in 2020. We'll start today with an overview of the past year, looking at overall travel market trends from China, developments within the Chinese travel trade, and the biggest stories in digital that relate to outbound tourism. Looking forward to 2020, we'll discuss growth potential this year for Chinese tourism around the world and new opportunities for marketing travel. At the end of the presentation, we're happy to take questions in a Q&A session. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar by using the Q&A button, which you should see on your Zoom control panel. Please do ask your questions using the Q&A button as opposed to the chat, because using the Q&A button means that we can very easily see and make sure that we answer all of the questions at the end of today's webinar, whereas they can get a little bit lost if you send your questions in the chat. Before we get started, I should also mention that we'll be sharing a lot of numbers and statistics with you today, but don't worry about writing everything down, as we will be sharing a PDF copy of the presentation with all attendees in the next day or two, as well as a link to review a recording of the webinar. My name is Sienna Perulis-Cook, and I'm Dragon Trail's Associate Director of Communications. I'm very pleased to welcome Michael Jones, my co-presenter for today's webinar from Create Consulting.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Jones, and as Sienna said, I'm here speaking on behalf of Create Consulting. Create Consulting, next slide, please. So Create Consulting was founded as an agency in Beijing 8 years ago, and we've got offices in Shanghai, Hangzhou, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Chengdu. And our company primarily focuses on B2B China tour operator relations and also traditional media relations like public relations. Our clients representing our clients in China include brands like South Africa Tourism, Jordan Tourism, Peril Tourism, Viking Cruises, and we also represent other brands like Dreamboard in Australia, etc.
Thank you. For those of you who may be new to Dragon Trail's monthly webinar series, I'd like to introduce Dragon Trail quickly too before we get started with the webinar today. We are a digital marketing agency that's focused exclusively on outbound travel from China. We help clients with consumer marketing on Chinese social media platforms, Chinese travel websites, media buy services, and through the creation of Chinese websites and customer service solutions. We also do extensive B2B work, helping tourism brands to connect with and train the Chinese travel trade online. The company is headquartered in Beijing with offices in Shanghai and Xi'an, as well as international offices in London, where I'm based, as well as Lexington, Kentucky in the US. We work with around 80 clients on 6 continents, including tourism boards, airlines, hotels, cruise lines, attractions, car rental companies, and other tourism brands. You can find out more about our services and case studies of our work on our website, dragontrail.com. Now let's get started with 2019's travel and digital trends. We'll first take a look at the growth of Chinese outbound tourism around the world in 2019. Generally speaking, this market is still growing, but this is not universally true. In 2019, some countries and regions saw a significant increase in Chinese visitors, whereas others experienced decline or stagnation. The world region with the most dramatic declines in mainland Chinese tourism was Greater China, meaning Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau. These are the destinations for a little less than half of all outbound trips from mainland China. And as you might imagine, mainland Chinese constitute a huge proportion of the inbound markets for these regions. Tourism to Hong Kong has been ravaged by ongoing protests in the city since last summer, and unfortunately, there's no sign of recovery in sight. Tourism from mainland China was down by about half over the October holiday period to Hong Kong, with group tourism down by over 80%. The Hong Kong Tourism Board has also basically stopped all of its tourism marketing on Chinese social media platforms like WeChat and Weibo. Tourism to Taiwan has also been devastated in 2019 after the mainland government stopped citizens from being able to apply for an independent travel permit to Taiwan in the beginning of August. After restrictions on group travel a few years ago, Taiwan had actually shifted their tourism marketing strategy to focus on FITs from the mainland, and the results of this were very good. So it's an especially big blow now that tourists from the mainland can no longer travel independently to Taiwan. With pro-independence candidate Tsai Ing-wen getting re-elected as Taiwan's president this past weekend, it seems unlikely that this tourism market will recover quickly either. One bright spot in Greater China is Macau, and Macau saw significant increases in mainland tourism in 2019. They potentially benefited from the declining numbers to Hong Kong and Taiwan, with people going to Macau instead, but mainland visitor numbers to Macau dropped in November, so we may be starting to see a spillover effect from Hong Kong, though this remains to be seen, and we'll have to keep an eye on it in 2020. The situation in the rest of Asia is much more positive, with some short-haul destinations probably attracting visitors who may otherwise have gone to Hong Kong or Taiwan. At the start of the year, we saw lower numbers than in 2018 for Thailand, which is the most popular destination beyond Greater China for mainland tourists. But despite a strong Thai baht, by the end of September, the situation seemed quite stable, with nearly 2% growth year on year in the first 9 months of the year. I should note here that all of these numbers and statistics are things that I found directly from the tourism boards of those companies, generally on the tourism board's website itself. Vietnam also had some year-on-year decline at the start of 2019, but they also recovered by the later part of the year. Singapore is somewhere that's definitely benefiting from declining tourism to Hong Kong, with around 5% growth in Chinese inbound tourism, and they're also benefiting from a new visa policy that we'll look at a little bit later. Japan saw really significant growth, and it actually pulled ahead of Thailand as the most popular outbound destination for Chinese tourism this past October holiday. Tourism to South Korea, which had dropped a lot in 2017 because of the ban on group tourism and cruises from China, is continuing to recover very strongly, and this may also be a destination that is benefiting from the drop in tourism to Greater China destinations. Then other countries around Asia, like the Philippines, Cambodia, and Myanmar, also saw really strong growth in 2019. Moving on to long-haul markets, Oceania is a mixed picture. Tourism to New Zealand, where China is the second largest inbound market after Australia, was down by 11% as of October, even though 2019 is the New Zealand-China tourism year. It is worth noting that these official tourism years never seem to have a positive effect on Chinese arrivals, according to research that was done by the China Outbound Tourism Research Institute, COTRI. So this fact shouldn't be especially concerning that it's the tourism year, but it's still concerning that tourism is down over 11%. I've seen a lot of media reports this year about the so-called slump in Chinese tourism to Australia, but according to data from the Australian Tourism Board's website, Chinese arrivals were actually up over 3% as of September. So this isn't the kind of rapid growth that we saw earlier in the decade, but it's not particularly worrying either. That said, we'll have to see how Chinese New Year tourism could be affected by the Australian bushfires, as there already have been some cancellations because of that. North America is the long-haul market with the biggest declines in Chinese tourism in 2019. This is affected partially by political factors, as well as a weakening of the renminbi against the US dollar and stricter visa policies from both the US and Canada. Chinese tourism to the US, which was already declining in 2018, was down by another 6.5% in the first 9 months of 2019. Meanwhile, Chinese tourism to Canada was down by 10% as of October. It's still important to note, though, that the US received 2.35 million Chinese visitors during this period of time, and Canada over 500,000. And that the US, like Australia and New Zealand, is still one of the most popular long-haul destinations for Chinese tourists, despite the declining numbers that we've seen over the last couple of years. Chinese tourism to Europe continued steadily in 2019, with Southeastern Europe in particular standing out as a new hotspot. We saw surging Chinese arrivals to countries like Montenegro, Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia. There are a number of reasons for this growth, including visa reforms that make it easier for Chinese to visit, and very friendly political relations between many of these countries and China, which then leads to a positive image in the Chinese media and encouragement for people to visit as tourists. But this part of the world is also popular for experienced Chinese travelers who have already been to Western Europe and want to see more of the European continent and visit a place that not too many other Chinese have been to before. And Southeastern Europe is lucky to have beautiful nature and a local culture that's very appealing to Chinese tourists as well. Though the situation is less certain now, and Michael will talk more about that when we get to our forecast for 2020, 2019 was a strong year for Chinese tourism growth to the Middle East, as we predicted in last year's January webinar. There was continued growth for the UAE, strong growth for Oman and Jordan, and continued recovery for Chinese tourism to Israel. Chinese are now one of the nationalities that's been most interested in tourism to Saudi Arabia since the country started issuing tourist visas at the end of September. And a recent survey showed that around 1/3 of Chinese millennial travelers expressed interest in visiting the Saudi UNESCO World Heritage Site of Al Ula. I'll turn over to Michael now to talk about Africa and Latin America.
Thank you. So 2019 for Africa was a bit similar to 2018, other with the exception of Egypt. Still most of the travel to Africa is more on the niche side. Egypt is doing extremely well with Chinese inbound arrivals, with them predicting of close to 500,000 for 2019. South Africa and Kenya have done well, but they haven't grown that much in 2019, with South Africa expecting to achieve about 100,000 Chinese arrivals, and for Kenya, around about the same number also. So they're pretty much doing equally. Tanzania, for their part, is doing okay with 10,000 for 2019, but the real kind of stars for Africa for 2019 were the emergence of more niche emerging markets like Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda. Then if there was any year for, well, any star of the year for 2019, it was absolutely South America. Due to a lot of the problems that have been mentioned already with North America, with Canada and America, a lot of the people that were planning to travel to North America just changed their itineraries for South America long-haul destinations. As a consequence, destinations especially like Argentina, Brazil, Peru did extremely well in 2019, saw growth where they often didn't see growth from other markets. There were some hiccups along the way though, with the protesting in Santiago that affected Chile, and therefore also from the group tourism perspective, when the one destination has been affected, it will have a knock-on effect with the other partners in those itineraries. Bolivia also had some challenges, but for the rest of it, 2019 was a really good year for South America.
Thank you. Moving on now to some more overall trends in the market and Chinese outbound tourism behavior. The Chinese outbound tourism market has matured a lot since it kind of started to Just a minute. Since it started at the end of the 1990s, and we're now seeing many regular outbound travelers. According to an iResearch report in 2019, nearly 80% of Chinese outbound travelers are now going abroad at least once a year. They also found that 45% went abroad more than once a year. Travel website Mafengwo released their own data, which is very similar. Mafengwo focuses on independent travelers and their audience is mostly millennial. They said that 48% of Chinese outbound travelers now leave the country more than once a year. These trips are not only becoming more frequent, but they're also becoming longer. OTA Tunio found that the average length of FIT trips in 2019 was now 8 days or more, and this is between half a day to 1 day longer than in previous years. Other surveys also show that the large majority of Chinese outbound tourists are traveling abroad for more than 5 days at a time. So this is good news for long-haul destinations and even short-haul destinations that are now having Chinese travelers stay for longer. Chinese travelers continue to spend the most money as a whole compared to any other nationality of tourist, though average per capita spending is still lower than tourists from the US or Germany. And average per capita spending varies significantly based on the destination. So it's quite low for day trips to Hong Kong, but much higher for long-haul travel, especially to Europe. Women and travelers born in the 1980s, which are both the kind of biggest demographics in Chinese outbound tourism, these groups spend the most amount of money in terms of volume. But you shouldn't write off other demographic groups. 2019 research by UnionPay showed that men actually spend more per capita, even though they make up less than half of outbound travelers from China. The same report also found that older travelers actually make the biggest purchases, which may be significant for retailers. Then there was also data released by Alipay in 2019, where they saw that the age demographics where spending was growing the most were the oldest group of travelers as well as the youngest group of travelers. Younger travelers, as in past years, are a very important demographic. They make up the majority of OTA and travel website users in China, and they tend to travel abroad more, especially the generation that was born in the 1980s, but every year the generation that was born in the 1990s becomes more and more important for outbound tourism, as well as the emergence of Chinese that were born in the year 2000 or later. These younger travelers are more likely to be experienced in traveling at a younger age, which means that they'll probably be more comfortable, independent, and adventurous when they're traveling abroad. As you can see from Ma Fengwo's report here, Chinese outbound travelers who were born in the 1970s left China for the first time at the average age of 30. For those born after 1995, so now in their early to mid-20s, the average age was just 18. Customized travel was already a buzzword in Chinese outbound tourism in 2018, and it continued to grow in 2019. There are more and more travelers now who are opting, instead of going on large tours, to travel together as a multi-generational family group or with several families traveling together. Both OTAs and traditional travel agencies have done a lot to develop products for this growing small group and customized tour market. And this includes products for the family groups as well as for couples and solo travelers. And these products comprise many different kinds of themes and interests, including things like photography and adventure tourism. Summer continues to be an increasingly important period for outbound travel, especially for youth travel. And this can include family travel during the school holidays in July and August, as well as post-graduation trips for younger Chinese who have just graduated from high school or university, as well as Chinese who are traveling abroad to attend educational programs. Another continuing trend in 2019 is a focus on the cultural aspects of travel. And this includes seeing how local people live and visiting cultural attractions like museums. Outdoor adventure experiences are also something that's popular. So we can see from these kinds of trends that many travelers now want to do something different than just having a generic kind of sightseeing and shopping focused itinerary that used to be the norm for everyone. However, that said, one major Chinese tourism trend of 2019 seems like an updated throwback to the old-fashioned style of rushed box-ticking travel, and this is Daka Tourism. Daka translates literally as punch card, and it's about checking in to a must-visit tourism site by taking a photo or a video for social media to show that you were there. It's a major phenomenon for young people doing domestic tourism in China and has led to some places in China being overwhelmed by visitors who have to get the photo. But you can also start to see the phrase Daka coming up more and more often for outbound travel to refer to the must-see places, including landmarks, attractions, and pop-up stores and installations. Before I hand over to Michael to give us more insights on B2B trends in 2019, I'd like to review some of the more significant developments in flights and visas in 2019, as these things often have a big impact on tourism. Last year, China got its first direct flights to Oslo, as well as 2 new flight routes to Budapest and 3 new flights to Rome. Beijing's new Daxing Airport opened at the end of September and started international flights at the end of October. So this will expand capacity for international travel to and from China's capital in the long run. While Helsinki was actually the first European airport to have flights from China back in 1978, this has been the first year that it is served by Chinese airlines and not just by Finnair. Especially significant with these new routes by Chinese carriers is the Juneyao Airlines route from Shanghai, which started in the summer of 2019. Because starting from March of 2020, this route will be extended to fly onwards from Helsinki to Keflavik in Iceland 3 times a week, as well as twice a week to Dublin in Ireland and twice a week to Manchester in the UK. Dublin went from having 3 East Asia flights to Beijing, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen earlier in 2019 to none at all by the end of the year. So it's very good news for Ireland to get this Juneyao extension from Helsinki twice a week, as well as the resumption of Cathay Pacific's Hong Kong route, which is planned for March too. And it looks like that route will probably become a seasonal one. In addition to new flights, we also saw increased interest in international train travel in 2019 from Chinese tourists, with significant increases in sales of Eurail passes, as well as Japanese train tickets. Moving on to visas, at the start of the year, Japan and Ukraine started offering e-visas to Chinese passport holders. Then in the summer, Singapore started offering 72-hour visa-free travel for Chinese passengers who are either going onward to a third destination or traveling back to China. Then this autumn, Iran abolished visas for Chinese tourists, and Brazil's president, Bolsonaro, made a surprise announcement that Chinese would no longer need tourist or business visas. As of January 1st, 2020, Chinese passport holders can now visit Uzbekistan without a visa for up to 7 days and Malaysia for 15 days. In the meantime, Chinese passports became both easier and 25% cheaper to apply for in 2019, though it does seem unlikely that this will actually cause the number of Chinese passport holders to double to 240 million in 2020, as was previously claimed in some Chinese media reports.
Okay, now we're going to talk just a little bit from some of the feedback we've been receiving from the Chinese outbound tour operators. So a bit of a change from 2018 is that the tour operators still continue to face a very challenging market at the moment. This is due to the bit of a slowing of the Chinese economy. They're also facing growing political risk for potential destinations like in North America, and also growing security risks of destinations, such as in Europe and the Middle East. Then furthermore, the transformation from large groups to smaller groups and FIT continues to grow. This is especially the case as we've seen with Australia and New Zealand. So that is also putting pressure on the traditional outbound tour operators. Tour operators do, however, they still have an opportunity to see great growth with especially the new emerging long-haul destinations, and especially on the higher end spectrum. And in this case, South America did very well in 2019 with group travel, as we've seen. I'll come back to another point in a moment. Lastly, 2019 was a bit of, well, quite a tough year for the wholesale industry. There was also a lot of losses in the charter industry. So for charter groups for next year, they're going to be a lot more careful about their planning and which packages they're going to put out to the market. What we've learned from speaking to the tour operators, though, is still that the middle class group tours still remain the power behind Chinese outbound travel. So if you have a destination where you're looking to still attract more on the high-end group travel from China, then our recommendations are that you target for more the senior group travelers, people normally between the ages of 45 and 50 and older, up to 75, and especially on the female category. Furthermore, overall for the 2019 outbound group markets, there was little growth. North America was particularly down, so tour operators that focus on the North American market have a really challenging time. This was also especially the case for people in the charter industry. We did find that some of the tour operators are a bit more upbeat for 2020 though. Some are expecting some mild growth over 2019, but most that we spoke to are expecting either little or no growth. However, there are still niche areas where they can enjoy growth, and that is, like we mentioned, long-haul emerging destinations. In terms of the actual profile of the people that are paying for these group purchases, we find that they are still the majority of the women decision makers, first, second, and third tier cities, and they are normally aged between the ages of 40 and 75. However, having said this, and also linking with some of the information Sienna was talking about earlier, there is a growing segment of men purchasing in the high end, normally men between the ages of 40 and 60. They are starting to have a much more spending power in this industry now. Overall, for the biggest winners for 2019, we find that absolutely would have been Japan for short-haul destinations, and for long-haul destinations, it would have been South America for 2019. For the biggest losers for 2019, for long-haul, absolutely would be the North American market, and for the short-haul market, it was South Korea that is still facing group challenges. Over here, we've included a kind of a price list of comparing that you can see the difference between the pricing and the different destinations, comparing wholesale with the retail, wholesale at the top. As you can see, it's still quite low pricing. People can get really a good value for money packages there for 5,000 to 10,000 RMB, so just up to $1,500. And that would be typically places like in the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. Southeast Asian products are selling even more economically, just over $200 and upwards. And then, but it's interesting to see the stark contrast with the pricing when you go to the Antarctic products, where still it's quite expensive. It's $7,000 up to $15,000. What is interesting though, just the main takeaway for this slide, I would say, is that the average packages selling for all the kind of outbound tour operators, you're looking at something around about $2,000 for long haul. And as I mentioned earlier, there's we included the middle end, the retail prices, and you can just use that for your own reference later on.
I'd now like to cover some of the most relevant digital trends of 2019. First is the ongoing rise of mobile payments via WeChat Pay and Alipay. At the end of 2019, it was revealed that 2018 was the first year in which more payments were made overseas by Chinese using mobile payments than by using cash. But bank cards were still the leading form of payment. We'll have to wait for 2019 data to be released to see if this past year marked the first time that mobile payments were the most popular form of payment. But what we do know is that mobile payments overseas grew throughout 2019, with Alipay volume increasing by 11% year-on-year for the May holiday period in 2019, and increasing by 14% year-on-year during the October holiday. Short video also continued its upward trajectory in 2019, and it's increasingly popular for tourism marketing, even for B2B as a resource that Chinese travel agents can share with their clients. There's also a crossover between short video and KOL, or key opinion leader, or influencer marketing, as vlog viewers in China doubled to 249 million in 2019 and are expected to grow nearly 50% again into 2020. And a majority of KOLs now create video content in addition to photos and writing. Although there are many short video platforms in China, micro video platform Douyin continues to grab headlines and grow users. They recently announced that they've reached 400 million daily active users. So here I've just shared a few examples to show short videos related to tourism in China. The first one on the left is a short video that was shared by Tourism Australia on their WeChat account. Tourism Australia had quite a lot of success, especially in the second half of the year on WeChat, with their short videos showing Australian wildlife. Then in the middle is a vlog that was posted on Weibo by a KOL of her trip to Namibia this summer. And then on the right is a Douyin video with nearly 20,000 likes that was filmed in Italy. Travel booking is also increasingly digital and mobile for Chinese consumers, and this includes OTAs, which grew their user numbers by 65% in the first half of 2019, as well as traditional travel agencies like Kaisa or Utour. Chinese are more likely than the global average to use mobile booking platforms for travel, and they're increasingly likely to still be booking travel products while they're on the road and already in the destination. So that was 2019. What should we expect, or at least tentatively anticipate, for 2020?
Okay, so let's begin with Australia. The great news for Australia is that the Chinese will absolutely continue to Australia for as far as we can see, but they're just going to be traveling in a slightly different structure. They're going to be traveling in small and family groups. FIT continues to increase to Australia, while groups are in size declining to Australia over time. It's a maturing of the market for Australia. So that is really good news for them, despite the bushfires that for sure would have had an impact on them for the Chinese New Year times. We've already heard of cancellations, but that will be short term. But over the long term, we just see modest, well, steady growth for Australia. For the Middle East, we would have been extremely upbeat for potential for the Middle East up until a few weeks ago. As we showed and shared earlier, for 2019 was a fantastic year for the Middle East. There was growth pretty much all around the region. It was coming back from all terror threats in the past. And so it was onto a good trajectory. However, since the incident with the Iranian general and clashes with America, immediately following that news, there were cancellations across the board for Middle East, even to places like Dubai. So as a consequence, the tourism boards of the UAE and even Israel and everybody, they've all been issuing press releases just to remind everybody that it's business as usual and everything is safe in their parts. For Africa, unless there are any unforeseen security issues, we absolutely expect steady growth going to Africa. Egypt will continue as they are very strong already and will continue to get more and more travelers from China. Other more niche destinations like Tanzania, Namibia will continue to grow. South Africa, Kenya will be more on the moderate side. But we expect to see good growth for Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, and places like Uganda for 2020. For Latin America, we expect Latin America to continue to benefit from the losses in North America and also from their own marketing efforts that they're doing so hard and well in the China market. Although Brazil will see a bit of a setback from the fires that they had in the Amazon, they should stabilize, and we should expect to see big growth for destinations like Peru and Argentina. For Europe, we expect to see sustained growth for southeastern and eastern Europe. We're also seeing places of growth still modestly growing in the areas like Scandinavia and also in the Balkans. And right now to Greece, things are also growing with the new Beijing-Athens flight that has been launched and ongoing promotional activities. And lastly, for North America, it remains the geopolitical challenges that have been discussed at length so far. So for 2020, we would go with the belief that there's only going to be modest growth because, well, hopefully and thankfully, a lot of the issues that have been dominating this topic so far should start going away within the first half of 2020. So then they should be back to some modest growth again.
Thank you. Now I'd like to talk about some of the other trends that we expect for 2020, especially in terms of opportunities for products and tourism marketing. So I expect that many of the dominant trends that we'll see in 2020 will actually be continuations of things that we've already seen in 2019 or even earlier. And one of these is customized travel, which really emerged as a trend in 2018, was very big in 2019, and seems set to just keep going. We spoke to a number of Chinese travel agencies at the end of last year and found that they're all preparing more niche and individualized products. An example here is a whole page of packages that you can find on Ctrip for private small group tours where you travel together with a professional photographer who takes really social media friendly pictures of you while you travel together. And these trips include destinations all around China, Asia, and even to Europe. So there's potential there for tourism marketers who are pitching kind of more niche and interest-based products. Another theme that came up in our interviews with Chinese travel agencies and Chinese websites, and also something that Dragon Trail is developing as a solution for our clients, is greater personalization in marketing through the use of data. And this will help to deliver more relevant offers and communications to travelers based on their specific interests, their location, demographics, and their past behavior. How will Chinese social media develop in 2020? I think we should expect more interactivity to get users more engaged with content on platforms like WeChat. And I'll be sharing some examples of how to do this in next month's webinar. I would also expect a greater push to drive user-generated content, as this can have a huge impact on engagement. We've seen some really big successes with kind of user-generated content-driven posts on WeChat at the end of 2019. And this kind of content can also help brands to reach new audiences. There are some new social media platforms to keep an eye on, and the ones that imitate Instagram will likely be most relevant to travel marketers. Oasis by Weibo launched in 2019, and it recently became fully public rather than invite only. You can see some screenshots from Oasis below. The search bar on Oasis includes a travel dedicated filter, so you can browse content that is specifically related to travel, and you can see that in the picture on the left here. And the picture in the middle is an example of a KOL post. KOLs already started using the Oasis app when it was invite only, so they're already well established on this app. And many international travel brands are already using Oasis as well. On the right, you can see a post by Small Luxury Hotels of the World. And if you're on Weibo these days and you go to the account of certain tourism boards, you'll see the Oasis logo pop up a lot. And so that is when these brands are already posting on Oasis, and then it automatically posts to Weibo as well. In the meantime, Tencent, which is WeChat's parent company, they're trying to stay competitive by launching a number of new social networking apps. They have been kind of resting on their laurels over the past couple of years because of WeChat being the biggest social media platform in China, but now they're starting to feel threatened by companies like ByteDance, which is the company behind Douyin. So now Tencent is coming out with new apps and also enhancing some of WeChat's features, particularly its search function, which is always something that WeChat has been a little bit behind on compared to other social media apps in China. Even old school Facebook style platform Renren is now trying to make a comeback in China with a new mobile app. So not all of these developments in social media in China will necessarily have a direct and immediate impact on travel marketing, since these new apps that are coming out from Tencent are more about social networking and dating rather than marketing apps. But we will have to monitor how younger generations especially might be shifting away from WeChat and onto other platforms that can be used by marketers to target those demographics. So that wraps up our presentation for today. Before we move on to the Q&A section, I'd like to first let you know about Dragon Trail's next webinar, which is coming up on Tuesday, the 18th of February. This is your chance to learn all about the most successful tourism marketing on Chinese social media in 2019, with a deep dive into our WeChat rankings for tourism brands for the full year of 2019, as well as our first ever Weibo rankings report for Q4 2019. You can find out more about the webinar and register for either of the two sessions on the events section of our website, or going directly to the link below, which you'll get in the PDF of today's webinar, which we'll be sending out either tomorrow or the next day to all of you. I wanted to note that while our webinars are usually always on Wednesdays, we're making a slight change in the schedule in February, and it'll be on a Tuesday, so make sure that you know that and don't miss the webinar. So now we're open for Q&A. If you have any questions for us, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for attending today's webinar, and a huge thank you to Michael from Create Consulting for presenting with me and sharing your insights on the Chinese tour operator market.
Thank you, Sienna, and thank you, everybody. This was really enjoyable, and